wheels, one can see Bologna, Italy, a grand old city where fortified walls once protected this historic European center of culture. With a tradition of art and commerce dating back to the Middle Ages, Bologna is also home to Europe's oldest university. This historic campus is an appropriate setting to spotlight one of the world's classic sports cars, the favorite Lamborghini Countach, manufactured right here in Bologna. Ciao, I'm Mike Lech, and welcome to Adventures in Scale Modeling. Countach is an Italian word, which means wondrous, sensuous thing. Since 1963, Lamborghini has built high-powered, stylized cars for drivers who want the ultimate in street legal performance. The Countach, Lamborghini's 12-cylinder masterpiece, has a top speed of 180 miles per hour. Later on today, we're going to visit the Lamborghini factory and learn how this stunning car has evolved over its 19-year production run and take a close-up look at its successor, the Diablo. But first, let's go to the museum workshop and begin construction of a scale model Lamborghini Countach. The spirit of creativity is indicative throughout Bologna, within its people, architecture, art objects, as well as its automobiles. Creativity is also an important characteristic when we want to successfully build our models. Mike Fleckenstein is new to our workshop, and he's working on the famed Countach. Mike, what steps have you prepared to show us today?
Well, Mike, I'm going to demonstrate how to get a high gloss finish using enamels rather than airbrush or lacquer, which can sometimes be expensive and difficult to apply.
Okay, what's one of the first things we'll do?
Well, we want to wash our hands first, Mike, to avoid getting any grease on the subject.
Okay, well, let's go right back to the sink here and wash them up. Turn on some water, of course. Get a paper towel. Now, it's important for us to wash our hands because we don't know, but there's a lot of oil and grease on our hands that could go into the finish of our model.
That's right, Mike.
Okay. Throw my paper towel away. Okay, now that our hands are nice and clean, we can handle the plastic. What do we do next?
Well, Mike, we want to take the plastic body and mount it on a hanger. The reason for this is that it will allow us to hold the model without getting paint on our hands, and also allow us to mount it to dry without getting dust on it.
That's a good idea. It's a very inexpensive tip as well. Okay, we're ready to spray paint. What do we do?
Well, Mike, we hold the car body by the hanger and take our flat red paint, shake up the can a little bit.
Make sure it's nice and mixed up there.
And we should test it on a piece of scrap cardboard or paper.
Okay.
Make sure it's coming out there.
Sometimes the can will clog. It's nice to go ahead and test our can.
That looks fine.
Now, it looks like we have a good can. Let me put this away for you. You're going to go ahead and spray paint.
That's right, Mike.
And I see you're going past the model, which is really good. We don't want to get any runs in it.
That's right, Mike. You should always start on one side and move the can leisurely from side to side, trying to get an even coat.
This is also a good time to point out that we're also, again, working with spray paints here in the workshop. We want to make sure that we have a well-ventilated area. If you're going to work with spray paints, make sure you have a window open. Maybe you can even do it outside. What do you think, Mike?
As a matter of fact, Mike, most of these models I've done for the show, I do outside to keep the overspray off the concrete down in my workshop.
That's a very safe way of doing it. Okay, now, Mike, now that's finished. Where are you going to go with it?
Mike, I'm going to take it over to a drying rack and hang it upside down. This will keep the dust from settling on the finish as it dries.
Oh, that's a good idea. Now, how long do you think it'll take to dry in between coats like this?
We should allow at least an hour or 2 hours between a primer coat and a color coat.
Okay, now what's our next step?
Well, Mike, I prepared a pre-painted body so we can apply the color coat over the primer body.
Okay. You have it hanging up there. This is dried, what, about maybe 2 hours, you say?
That's right, Mike.
Okay. Now, one thing that surprises me, Mike, in model building, we've learned that we spray paint models in gray as a primer. Why are we using red?
Well, Mike, it's important for the finished color coat that we have a good base. The flat primer not only prepares the plastic for the gloss color coat that goes over it, but if we had used a gray primer, some of the gray might bleed through the red, which is a lighter color.
So we should use the red for a red base color.
Yes, Mike.
That's a great tip. Okay, now you're going to spray paint yet again.
I'm going to spray paint again. Again, we should shake up our hands.
Test our hands. Do you ever get much clogging on these cans?
No, Mike. One of the things you can do is before you use the spray can, soak it in some warm water, and this makes the paint flow more freely.
Oh, okay. Warms up the paint a little bit.
Exactly.
Great tip. Now, we're going to spray paint that again. This is our top coat on top of our dry, flat color.
Again, using the same techniques. Go from side to side. And what you want to watch for here as you're doing this step, Mike, is an even coat. Because this is going to appear in the finished product.
Okay, so we don't want any runs here. Rather go past it dramatically than to stop in the middle.
Exactly. The ticket here is several light coats. Just keep on moving it around and applying the finish evenly.
So light coats versus one big heavy coat.
Exactly. With a big heavy coat, Mike, you might run the risk of the paint running, and we don't want that.
Makes sense, because the paint is pretty thin, and when it goes on thick, it will run. That looks really good there, Mike. Now, after this is dry, what do we do?
Well, Mike, we have to follow the same procedure. Hang it upside down and keep the dust off it. And this time we have to let it dry for at least 24 hours, because the next step is going to involve polishing it with an automotive car polish.
Okay, well, hang it up for it to dry, and let's see what you have next.
Mike, I prepared a body, again primered it, gloss finished it, and let it dry for at least 24 hours. And now we're going to demonstrate the car polish.
It looks relatively shiny. Why do we have to go ahead and polish it again?
Well, Mike, it is shiny. But if you compared this to the finish on the real car, you would notice that the real car is very much more shiny. It's a very high gloss, almost like a mirror. And even though the paint is a gloss enamel, it doesn't dry to a high gloss. But we can duplicate that finish with the car wax.
I was going to say, how do we attain that finish? And what do you have here? Let's take a look at this.
It's just a normal liquid car wax. Even when you apply it on the real car, it doesn't take a whole lot of work to put it on. You just basically rub it in a circular motion on the finish, let it dry to a haze, and wipe it off. What produces the shiny finish on the model is that there's a slight abrasive in it. And it would be the same thing as when you got a new car and you wax it for the first time. On your rag, you would notice some of the car's finish coming off. And you're going to see the same effect on the model.
Okay, well, let's see you apply it.
We start by using a clean rag. No t-shirt would be fine. And we put a little bit of wax on the rag.
Okay.
And then dab it back against itself. Reason being, you want most of the wet, runny part of the wax off. You want just the abrasive and the cleaner part.
So we want to apply this wax very, very lightly.
Very sparingly.
Okay. Which part are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to do the front trunk area here.
Okay.
Since this is a mid-engine car. And I'll start by just wiping the rag
It's going
in a
very,
circular
very
motion.
lightly. Now, just like on a real car, we're doing a circular motion.
Exactly. And when you first put this on, you'll notice that since the wax is wet, it will feel very smooth to you as you're putting it on. As the wax dries in this finish and you start taking more of the red off, it will start feeling stiffer, a stiffer motion.
Oh, so now you're getting into
You
that
know,
top layer of paint.
Exactly.
Okay, now, how long do we have to wait for this to dry then?
Well, Mike, you could blow on it a little bit to speed up the drying time, or you could use a hairdryer set on a low heat setting. You want to avoid using a high heat setting because it might melt and warp the plastic parts.
But a model could accelerate the drying time.
That's right, Mike. Basically, right now, I'm just going to keep on polishing a little bit until I get a really smooth feeling. I can see that finish underneath starting to polish up. You can see it starting to lose its rough texture
sure
here
is. But
and come down to a...
still looks rather matte in a finish. Are you going to be able to buff this up?
That's right, Mike. The next step in the process will be to let this dry to a haze and then buff it up with another clean rag.
Okay. Is it
We're about ready for
it?
it? Yep.
Okay, why don't you buff that up for us now?
We'll just blow on a little bit to dry it down to a haze. You can see it changing to a haze right there.
Yeah, it sure is.
Take a clean rag. And again, circular motion, lightly polish it.
And this motion here, really you don't have to take it long because it's already dried up into a haze, just like on a real
Just
car.
like on the real car. Most of these liquid
Let's
waxes,
take a look at that.
most of these liquid waxes will not leave any dust. So that's ready to go just as it is.
It looks fantastic. This was a great tip, Mike. Why don't you prepare a few more steps for our model as we head out to Italy to visit Lamborghini. We're here now with Mr. Marmarelli. Mr. Marmarelli is the engineer in charge of technical development here at Automobile Lamborghini. Mr. Marmarelli, welcome to Adventures in Scale Modeling. Mr. Marmarelli, can you tell us, in 1972, when the Countach was designed, what was the major revolutionary step?
Excuse me, before start I would like excuse my very poor English. Because you know, the official language of the Lamborghini designers and builders is not English, is not Italian, but is modernist slang. And I can't speak very well Italian, but I speak very well only modernist slang.
Okay.
So, yes, this is the king of the car. On 72, Mr. Gandini, you know Mr. Gandini is our designer, designed this very strange car. At that time, the car was more advanced than any other car. Why? Because of the very unusual line and because of very unusual at the time package, very unusual mechanical parts. I'm talking about the engine. The engine position. The Countach was the first mid-engine car.
And why was that?
Why? Because for the performance, for the stability, the best position is to fix the engine on the body center of the car. You know what I mean?
Yes, right in the middle to balance.
Right in the middle to balance the car. You must have no difference between the car when we have the tanks, when the tank is full, and when there are one or two drivers.
So that made
A big difference.
Tell us as we walk down the car here, over the long period of time that the Countach ran in production, what were some of the major design changes?
Yes. In my opinion, the first Countach was the best because was just a two-line, very smooth, no add-down parts. The first one, if you remember, on the first one car, no air scoop. The car was lower, less room inside,
Yes.
less room inside, and more round on this area, on the seat panel, and absolutely no add-on parts, like the new air scoop, like the new wheel arch, new seat panels, and so on.
So tell us, why do you think that the Countach was such a success?
Because the line was incredible. On 72, if you think another car, I can remember the Ferrari Daytona, Ferrari BB, all the other car was completely different. Not only for the line, for the style, but only for the package, for the engine and so on.
So it was the style.
Style.
Now you have a new style over here.
Yes.
The Diablo.
Yes.
Tell us about the Diablo and its design. You
Uh,
now have some American influence. How does the American design influence marry with the Italian influence?
Yes, okay. Basically, we have the same father of the Countach and of the Diablo. But as you can see, we have some influence from the design center of the Chrysler. The first Diablo was, if you like, more strong, more closer to the Countach philosophy. But looking at the future, looking at the durability of the style on the future, the new Diablo, designed with the influence of the Chrysler people, is, if you like, more round, a little bit more aerodynamic, but as you can see, we can have the same philosophy. It's more aerodynamic, but the aggressivity, the elegance of the line is the same than before.
Now, when you design a car like this,
Yes.
are there any limits that you must put on yourself that really affects the future advancement of the car? Can you build them too fast or too good?
We have just a big limit to our fantasy and are the low. You know what I mean? If you look at the front end of the Countach and of the Diablo, you can see the nose of the Countach is very low.
Yes.
Today, it's impossible to design a car like that. We have to absolutely, for the pendulum rules, for the barrier test, for the crash test, we have absolutely to have a nose more higher than the other one.
And that was
And
for
this-
safety?
For safety and to follow the American rules, the DOT legislation. This is for our fantasy is a limit. We know we need to follow safety rules, but this is a limit to our fantasy because if we, in the other case, I would like to have a nose very, very low, like Countach car, but today this the Countach car is not legal for that purpose.
So you can build anything you want,
Yes,
but you're limited by the rules.
not only American rules, but European rules.
Mr. Marmorelli, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
It was a great tour.
Thank you. Excuse me again for my query.
Thank you. Regulations by both the European community and the United States are the only limits to the fantasies of designers at Automobile Lamborghini. Now, as model builders, we're fortunate, since our fantasies are nearly unrestricted. Mike, how are you making out with our model?
Mark, coming along fine. We painted the car body and we polished it. Now we're about to add some details to the interior.
Okay, now what do we have to know when we go inside the car and bring out that detail?
Well, Mike, we're going to be using some flat brown water-based paint to brush over the light tan that I previously painted on this seat to bring out the details.
Okay, and what's the formula inside this paint?
Well, it's a mixture of the paint, some water, and some liquid detergent. Liquid detergent cuts down the surface tension so the paint will flow evenly into all the crevices of the seat.
All right, let's see you apply this technique.
Okay, first we need a little bit of water in this dish, if you would, please.
Okay, just some regular cold tap water.
That'll be fine.
All right. Here you go. Hope this is all you need.
That's great.
All right.
You should use a brush that's no more than a quarter of a half inch or a half inch wide because any more would cause puddles of paint to build up in the inside of the seat. You don't want that. So just dip the brush into the paint, take some of the excess off, and scrub it onto the seat.
Now it looks like you're just painting the seat brown. The details are there. We can hardly see them because you're covering them up with the paint.
I am, Mike, but the next step of the procedure is going to take away most of that flat brown paint, leaving just the tan highlights. I'm going to take my brush and clean it.
Yeah, it's a good thing to clean your brush almost immediately, Mike, because those brushes will dry out and then we end up having to replace them.
Right, they're very expensive. And cover up our paint. In order to speed the drying, Mike, we're going to use a hairdryer set on a low heat setting so we don't melt the plastic.
All right, this will accelerate our drying time as well.
Exactly. So just turn the dryer on.
How long does it usually take for this to dry when you're using a dryer like this?
Oh, just a couple of minutes, Mike, but I've prepared another seat and have it dry already so we can show the next step of the technique. And here it is.
Now again, it still looks like that seat is just completely painted brown and it's a little messy looking. How can you clean it up?
Well, Mike, what we're going to be using is some rubbing alcohol on a rag, and because the rubbing alcohol is a solvent for water-based paint, it will take the water-based paint away without affecting the enamel paint underneath.
All right, what do you use to apply?
We can use a rag for large areas or a Q-tip for small areas. I'm going to start with the rag. Just put a little bit on our rag.
You see, you're taking
Let it
some of that
dry,
off of there.
exactly. And holding the seat steady, quickly wipe the rag over the surface.
Mike, how much pressure do you have to put down on the seat to get that off?
Very little, Mike, because don't forget the water-based paint hasn't had all that long time to dry, and it'll come right off.
Looks good.
Yeah.
What about the Q-tip getting into those crevices? Is it hard to use?
Not at all, Mike. Same technique. Dip it into the alcohol and dab most of it off. and come back and get into your smaller areas that you can't reach with the rag.
Well, Mike, what is it you do, and how did you become interested in model building?
Well, by profession, I'm a computer programmer, Mike, and I've been interested in modeling ever since I was about 15 years old, so I can't really remember the first thing I built.
So you can't remember what you built before. You got some great techniques to show us. Now, Mike, as we learned at Lamborghini, the mid-engine design was a very popular design. It was the very first thing for them as well. They showed us how they pumped up their engine. How do we pump up ours?
Well, Mike, I brought along a book on the Countach, and it shows a side view of the engine detail, and we're going to try to duplicate that in the model.
Now, this is a good color picture, and it points out how important research is to our model building as well.
I brought along a completed and detailed engine. I'm going to be demonstrating how to add spark plug wiring to that engine.
Okay. Let's see it.
I have a length of thin red wire, which can be purchased at any electronics or radio supply store. And what we do is we cut that with our hobby knife into 12 equal segments. And then using either a pin vise or a moto tool, drill holes both in the surface of the distributor cap and the top of each cylinder.
So we make a larger hole for the distributor cap to receive all 12 wires at one time.
That's right, Mike.
All right.
Once we have the 12 wires together in a small bundle, put a drop of epoxy into the top of the distributor cap and cement the wires in place.
That's a really great technique. How did you simulate those manifolds or those two tubes going through? What is that, the air duct or what?
Those are the air ducts to the carburetors, and it's the same technique that was used on the interior, basically a flat gray paint with a black wash over it.
Okay, and that's a great way of pumping up our engine. But let's go back to the seats. One of the things that model builders like to do is put seatbelts in their car. And sometimes when we're supplied with seatbelts, they're kind of thick and bulky. Is there a better way of doing it?
Yes, Mike. What we can do is using some graphics chart pack tape, we can duplicate a seatbelt.
Okay. Now
Search
the chart pack is available where?
in any art supply store.
Is it relatively expensive or not?
About $2 for a roll this size.
All right, how do we work with it?
Well, using your hobby knife, cut 3 or 4 equal segments, depending on the number of belts you want to do. And taking your tweezers.
And you didn't measure those. Is there a critical point there?
At this point, it's not important, Mike, because we're going to be trimming it later on. Take the piece you've cut, lay it in place on the surface of the seat, holding one end in place, just wrap it around the back.
It looks very realistic. Now, what about that piece that's coming out of the back?
Well, Mike, this has to be cemented in the interior, so all we're going to do is turn the seat and snap it off with our hobby knife.
Now, that was a really nice technique. It allows us to do something simple that gives us great detail. Now, Mike, I think it's about time we look at the finished model. Bring it on in.
Okay, Mike, I have it right over here.
We'll put it right out here in front of the workbench so we can take a close look at it. And there it is. Let's take a look at that interior. This is the last thing we looked at, and we can see the seat belts in there. And the way that dark detail goes into the seats, it really does make it look realistic. And I'll tell you, Mike, I can't get over the beautiful finish that you put on this model, and that is simply with that wax. That's a great job. What about the windshield? Do we also polish the windshield as well?
No, Mike, not unless it's scratched. And if it is scratched, you can use the same automobile polish to take those out.
So that wax goes a long way. This is a great looking model. The last Countach left Lamborghini in 1990. And as they prepared to build the new Diablo, you could just sense the emotion in those who built one of the most radical sports cars in the world, the Countach. And I'll tell you, Mike, your model enables us to have a work of art in automotive design. Thank you for building it for us.
Thanks for asking, Mike.
Remember, to make realistic leather seats for your model cars, first paint with a flat tan, then a thin dark brown wash. Remove the top layer with alcohol for that convincing two-tone leather look. And car wax makes a great polish for model cars, too. While the performance of the Countach excites the senses, its design is a work of art. Lamborghini continues to blend handmade craftsmanship and innovative styling to produce exotic sports cars. That's all for this week. But join us again next time for more adventures in scale modeling.